Hey guys, welcome back to the 7th episode of my poker vlog. This one takes place at the Lodge in Round Rock, Texas on a late Friday afternoon. I play some 1-2 no limit holdem, and I had such a good time at the Lodge last time I decided to return again. I buy in for $300, and without further ado, let's take a look and see what happened. In this first hand, I've got Ace-King offsuit, and I'm sitting in the big blind. The cutoff raises to $17. The big blind calls, and I decide to re-raise to $45. The cutoff ends up calling, and the big blind folds. We've got a pot of $108. The flop comes Queen Ace Ace with 2 hearts, so I flop trips with the best kicker. I check and my opponent bets $25. I call in hopes of trapping. The turn brings the 9 of diamonds. I check again and my opponent bets $20 this time. Given our stack sizes, I decide to go ahead and push all in here for $75. She calls all in for $73 total. The pot's $304. The river brings the 9 of spades pairing the board. I hit the boat, but any other ace is chopping with me now. I expect we have the same hand at this point, but surprisingly, my opponent mucks and I scoop the $304 pot.
Thank you.
In this next hand, I've got pocket jacks. I'm sitting on the button. There's a $5 straddle, 2 players call, and I raise to $30. The straddler moves all in for $88 total, and I insta-call when it comes back to me. The pot's $189. We turn our hands up, and my opponent shows Ace-Jack offsuit. The flop comes 2 Queen 5 with 2 clubs. The turn is a 3 of hearts, and the river blanks with the 5 of diamonds. My opponent misses, and I scoop the pot.
Yeah.
Well, that's 2 you busted.
That's good so far. Thank you.
I'm mostly card dead for the next 2.5 hours. I do pick up a couple of playable hands like Ace-Jack and some suited connectors, but unfortunately I had to let them go pre-flop due to 3 bets from likely bigger hands that pushed me out early. It's tempting to play some of these hands feeling like I'm due or it's my turn, but patience is definitely a virtue in this game and there's no reason to force something at these stakes. In this next hand I've got pocket jacks again, and I'm sitting under the gun. I limp in and one player limps behind. A pretty crazy player at the table raises to $25 and announces,
Let's gamble.
One other player calls, and after everyone else folds back to me, I push all in with both players covered. Both players end up folding, and I pick up $57 uncontested.
That was an easy one. Thank you.
Thank you.
For this next hand, I've got Ace-2 suited in spades, and I'm sitting on the button. Several players limp in, and given that nobody's shown great interest in the pot, I decide to raise, making it $15. The big blind calls, and one of the limpers makes the call as well, bringing the pot to $48. The flop comes 3-7 queen with 2 spades, so I flop the nut flush draw with 1 overcard and some backdoor straight draws. The big blind checks to the limper, who opens for $15. I decide to continue being aggressive, and I raise to $50 here. The big blind immediately cold calls the raise, and the original better folds. The pot's now $163. The turn brings the 10 of diamonds. I don't improve, but when the big blind checks to me, I decide to continue putting on the pressure. I bet $75 and my opponent instantly folds, so I imagine he must have been on some kind of draw.
Sorry. Thank you.
In this next hand, I've got Ace-King suited in spades, sitting in the cutoff. A middle position player raises to $15. The next player to act calls behind, and I re-raise to $50. It folds back around to the original better who makes it $150 to go. We're both a bit deep here, and although I should probably either shove or fold, I end up making the call. The pot's $303. The flop comes Jack 5-5 rainbow. The opponent bets all in for $155. Given the action, there's no reason to think that my opponent is bluffing, so I lay my hand down. My opponent graciously shows that he did in fact have pocket aces.
Go ahead.
In this next hand, I've got Ace-Queen offsuit, and I'm sitting in the big blind. The under the gun player raises to $15, and the player after him calls. The low jack re-raises to $100. I make what I think is a good fold here, but let's watch the rest of the hand to learn if I made a good laydown. The under the gun player insta-calls, and the player behind him folds. The pot's $218. The flop comes Queen Jack 7 with 2 diamonds, so I would have flopped top pair top kicker here. It checks to the 3 better who makes it $200. The under the gun player calls, bringing the pot to $618. The turn brings the Jack of diamonds pairing the board. The under the gun player bets all in for $141. The low jack deliberates for quite a while before folding pocket 10s face up. The under the gun player shows he had pocket aces, so it looks like I was behind both players from the start and my fold was good. For the next hand, I've got pocket tens, and I'm sitting in the cutoff. The middle position player raises to $20. I make the call, everyone else folds, and we go heads up to the flop. The pot's $43. The flop comes 4-6 Jack Rainbow. There's an overcard to my pair, but there's no reason at this point to suspect my opponent's hit it. My opponent checks to me, and I decide to check behind for pot control here. The turn brings the Jack of Spades. I like this jack. I was worried about the jack on the flop, but now that there are two on the board, there's much less chance my opponent has one in his hand. When he leads for $20, I make the call, bringing the pot to $83. The river brings the 6 of Spades. My opponent checks to me again, and I very briefly consider making a thin value bet here, as I think there's a good chance my opponent has ace high or worse pocket pair. However, I end up playing it safe, and I check behind. I immediately announce my hand, and my opponent ends up showing his hand, but unfortunately my camera doesn't catch it in time before the dealer mucks it. If memory serves me correctly, he did in fact have ace high here though.
Thank you.
Thank you. Small big.
In this next hand, I've got ace queen offsuit, and I'm sitting in the hijack. I raise to $12. The cutoff and the big blind call, and 3 players head to the flop. The pot's $37. The flop comes 7-3-7 with 2 hearts. It checks to me, and I lead for $25. Only the cutoff makes the call, and we're heads up to the turn. The pot's $87. The turn brings a third 7 in spades. Any pair makes a boat now, and since I've shown aggression so far on every street, it makes sense that I could have a boat here based upon my actions. I continue with that line and lead for $45. The cutoff player immediately folds, and I take it down.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For the next hand, I've got ace-jack offsuit, and I'm sitting in middle position. The player to my right raises to $15, and I re-raise to $35. It folds around to my opponent, who calls, and we go heads up to the flop. The flop comes 10-king-king with 2 hearts. I flop a gut shot, but not much else. My opponent checks the flop to me, and I check behind with the idea that I would mix some checks in here regardless of whether I hit or miss this flop. I don't think checking gives away that I've missed the flop in this case. The turn brings the Jack of Hearts. So I pick up a pair now, and when it checks to me again, I decide to put out a bet. I make it $15, and my opponent ends up making the call. The river brings the 3 of clubs. My opponent checks to me a third time. I probably have the best hand, but I opt to take the safe route here, and I just check behind. I show my hand, and my opponent just shows that he has a jack as well, presumably with the worst kicker, and we scoop the pot.
Thank you.
For the last interesting hand in this session, I'm dealt pocket queens, and I'm second to act. The under-the-gun player limps in, and I limp behind with the idea that there has not been a hand gone by without a pre-flop raise for several hours, and I can 3-bet the raiser. However, we end up seeing it fold around to the small blind, who completes, and the big blind checks his option. My plan falls apart, and 4 players see the flop in an $8 pot. The flop comes 7-10-8 rainbow. This is about the ugliest flop for my hand. The under-the-gun player leads for $10, and I just go with a call for now. Everyone else folds, so it goes to the turn heads up in a $28 pot. The turn brings the 4 of diamonds. My opponent slows down and checks to me. I think if he had a 2-pair hand or better, he'd likely continue betting. Given that, I decide to make a bet here and put out $25. My opponent makes the call, and the pot's now $78. The river brings the 6 of diamonds. There's now 4 to a straight on the board. Thankfully, my opponent checks to me, and I opt to check behind. I announce my hand, and my opponent mucks, so I scoop the $78 pot.
When I came back from COVID, all the guys that started coming in from all the
So overall, it was a pretty good session. I won most of the hands that I was involved in, with the exception of that ace-king versus aces cooler. I did thankfully manage to get away from it without losing my stack, but it was a pretty big hit to my stack in the middle of my session. I also survived the card dead period for 2.5 hours, so I'm thankful that I got through that without feeling like I was obligated to dive into hands that weren't necessarily good hands or spots that I should be involved. So, I practiced my patience there and came out on the other side ahead. In all, I bought in for $300 and cashed out for $340. Unfortunately, because I was there for $4 and it's $10 an hour, that $40 went to the cost of playing, so I pretty much broke even. But I still had a good time. I enjoyed playing at the lodge. It was a nice visit to go back, and I'm looking forward to doing it again. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. It helps to get more viewers if you hit that like button, if you hit that subscribe button. And I'm trying to put these out as often as I can. So go ahead and do so, and we'll see you on the next video. Thanks a lot. Take care.